Om. Asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya, avirabirma eti, rudrayate dakshinamukam, te namam ahinityam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the ever-changing to the unchanging. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through and guide us evermore with thy loving presence. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Good evening. Nice to be here. Nice to nice to see people in person. They're probably are there people online also? Okay. Well, it would be just as nice to see the people online, but you know, during the height of the pandemic, we closed up our St. Louis center, and I can't tell you how hard it is to speak to a big room full of empty chairs. Yeah, it's so nice to see you. Gotta admire Swami Ramakrishna, who established the work in South India and was sent there at Swami Vivekananda's behest. And after the initial flurry of excitement was over and he got into the nitty-gritty of it, he was giving a lot of talks. And sometimes there, for whatever reason, wasn't a lot of enthusiasm. He'd show up at the hall where he was to speak and there wouldn't be anyone there. But he'd get up and he'd give his talk with all enthusiasm. On the rickshaw ride back to the ashram, whoever accompanied him would say, "Swami, why did you do that?" Oh, he said, I have I made a commitment to speak tonight, so I did. So I can appreciate him a little bit, although, there were people during the pandemic there was some kind of interaction, but it's so much easier when you're here and I'm here and we're all on the same page. Proximity does something wonderful. Holy people make holy places. And this is a holy place, and I'm so glad to be back here again. So the title is of the topic. The topic tonight is the practice of Dharma, and I'm not too great at picking titles. It would be better called the practice of Dharma and the good life. Now, the practice of Dharma, as we all know, is a critically important aspect of the Hindu worldview and essential to the practice of Hinduism. The good life, on the other hand, is an Americanism that refers to a certain kind of life that is generally considered to be desirable and even covetable in the American context. We'll compare and contrast these two views of life, and we'll start with the good life. It seems to me that the good life refers to a life with a certain amount of prosperity and a certain amount of leisure and a certain amount of pleasure. It is not necessarily the life of Riley, that is the life of complete ease, although it can be used that way. It seems that there is a certain amount of work and achievement that is assumed to contribute to this type of life. One can work hard and retire, and if one stays healthy, can live the good life in retirement. One can live the good life while earning a living, especially if one's livelihood is congenial to one's disposition. A degree of comfort and joy from family and friends can be part of the good life, although it is not necessarily the most covetable part. The luxury to be a bit frivolous seems to be a part of the mindset of a good life. We occasionally read about the person or couple who lead a very frugal, unostentatious life, quietly amassing a fortune, which the world finds out about when they die and leave it to some good charities. This would not qualify as the good life. Living the good life implies enjoying life here and now in the ways that people generally enjoy life. Some years ago, actually, maybe about 30 years ago, time flies when people say back in 2010, I think, wait a minute, that was yesterday. So anyway, about 30 years ago, sometime in the early 90s, I attended an interfaith clergy council meeting that was held at the Washington University Hospital Complex. At that time, it was very difficult to legally cut off life support once someone had been placed upon it because of a Supreme Court decision. And in that context, end-of-life issues were being discussed with the hospital staff. After the presentation, one of the Protestant ministers got up and spoke about his own parishioners who'd been very sick and placed in intensive care. Now he said he's in on this because some of these members of his congregation were pillars of the worship group, benefactors, stalwarts of the community. And he'd watch. At every fork in the road, you've got two chances. You've got two choices. You can quit giving care, or you can continue giving care, and generally at a great deal of cost and at more suffering for the patient, and not much more life. So, and as the forks, as you go on, and you take the fork to extend life, the cost increases, the benefit decreases, the suffering increases. That's generally the case. And he watched time after time when the patient or their relatives kept making choices to extend life at all costs. And cost could be quite considerable, maybe $300,000 for the last week at that time. It'd be much more now. And after explaining all of this, his experience, sharing that with us, he said, and I can't help wondering, if heaven is such a good place, why don't they want to go there? Very good observation. Why don't people want to go there? This is part of the understanding that usually goes along with the good life. It seems that the good life does not refer to being good in this life so that one can go to heaven, but to enjoy life here and now while we're alive and hold on to our biological life as if it were the only thing we have. One more thing about the good life. It seems to me that the important thing is somehow to attain wealth and pleasure and leisure and to enjoy them. Whether one obtains them honestly is not so important. Being moral in the pursuit of the good life seems to be a matter of expediency for many, rather than a matter of principle. Now, what are the consequences of this worldview of putting wealth and pleasure at the forefront and honesty and goodness on the back burner? And for this, I'll go to the introduction. I don't claim any originality here. I'll go to the introduction to a book entitled The Universe, God and God Realization, which deals with the process of creation and cosmology according to Advaita Vedanta. But the introduction takes a much different tone. And this is from the introduction. The 21st century person in general is not opposed to religion, rather indifferent to religion. Not an atheist or an agnostic or a skeptic of the old type. This change of attitude towards religion may be partly due to the advancement of science, which no longer holds to the old mechanistic and materialistic outlook of life in the world. Quantum physics and relativity theory have in general, for those that are aware of them and think about it, replaced this completely materialistic view of life. We know that these objects that we consider to be real in the ordinary sense are just a construct of the way our senses are adapted to perceive the world. It's not, we know it's not reality. We don't know what reality is. So the physical sciences no longer hold to a completely materialistic and mechanistic outlook on life. Its conception of the universe no longer completely contradicts the existence of God or a supreme being that's beyond the range of the senses. The modern person does not usually deny God, but has a tendency to ignore God, thinking that he or she can take care of the world without the help of God, make this life self-sufficient without taking into account what is beyond our range of ordinary perception. Equipped with scientific knowledge and technology, we're set on making this earth as happy, prosperous, and secure a place in which to live. However, if we do not include in our scheme of life any higher existence beyond it, our minds naturally become focused on the world that's perceivable through the senses. To enjoy this earthly existence in all the variety and richness of sense experience becomes the ideal of life. Science, philosophy, art, the arts, and ethics become increasingly subservient to the interests of the material life, and they consequently degenerate. They lose their uplifting force. Material achievement is lauded as the measure of our happiness, as the measure of our intellectual ability. If you were so smart, why wouldn't you have a couple of $1 million? The measure of even our moral advancement. This understanding of human progress has prevailed in the West for over 3.5 centuries. And it's no longer confined to the West. Wherever the Western methods of education are operable, that worldview penetrates there as well. When our inner nature deteriorates, material power and prosperity become insecure and perilous. Cold and hot wars on a large or small scale ensue. We can see this happening all around us. This is what is happening in modern times. Even the spread of education, which is usually considered to be the panacea of evil, can be of little help when the materialistic outlook is predominant in the culture. The educational policy of a nation, after all, is determined by its basic worldview, its basic attitude towards life. There cannot be a sound system of education without a sound philosophy of life. And if material advancement is the main objective of a culture, economic values will be given priority in the educational scheme. The trend of its educational system will be such as to impress upon the minds of young people the necessity of wealth rather than the necessity of virtue. They will learn the secret of making money without caring to learn the secret of right living. They will be much more eager to be prosperous and powerful than virtuous and spiritual. Now, I want to switch gears for a moment from this American perspective, which I've outlined in terms of my own understanding, the good life, to goodness. The first time I went out to speak after I joined the monastery, and this was in the very early 80s, I was asked to take part in an interreligious panel put together by the faculty advisor of the Honor Society of one of the large suburban school districts. There was a young rabbi, a Greek Orthodox priest, and two Protestant ministers, a minister couple, and I. And they asked us out there for a reason. And they had only one question for us, and that was, why should we be good? It was clear from the discussion that followed that this was not an academic question, but one of deep personal relevance. These young people were the cream of the crop. Why should we not do the wrong things that most teenagers think about doing and often do? They wanted answers from our respective traditions, but they also wanted reasonable, convincing answers that made sense to them. Our books say this or that, or even God says this, was not what they wanted. They wanted a rational explanation of the question, why should we be good in the pursuit of the good life? This is what it really boiled down to. Now, when Swami Vivekananda returned from the West for the first time in 1897, he said this to an audience in South India. The rational West is eagerly bent upon seeking out the rationality, the raison d'etre, of all its philosophy and of all its ethics. And you all know well that ethics cannot be derived from the mere sanction of any personage, however great and divine he may be or have been. Such an explanation of the authority of ethics appeals no more to the highest minds of the world's thinkers. They want something more, as sanction for ethical and moral codes to be binding. And he was talking in 1897, and this viewpoint that Swamiji is articulating has gone down not only into the high schools, it's gone into the grade schools. There's a trickle-down theory of, the highest thinkers,
I know.
Most people don't think, but they're happy to grab onto someone else's thought. And where is that eternal sanction of ethics to be found except in the only infinite reality that exists in you and in me and in all, the Atman? The infinite oneness of Atman, the eternal sanction of all morality, that you and I are not only brothers. Every literature voicing humanity's struggle towards freedom has preached that to you, that we are brothers and sisters. But the Atman says that you and I are really one. Atman equals Atman. Atman is Brahman, but also Atman equals Atman. There's no difference in the loving consciousness that exists in every living being. This is the dictate of Indian philosophy. This oneness is the rationale of all ethics and spirituality. And if you read Swamiji closely, this was his message to the West. This is what he didn't preach Ramakrishna. He didn't say, hey, we've got an avatar too. He preached non-dualism. He preached, he didn't use the term Advaita. He was able to just express it in ordinary language. But he was talking about the highest truth, the most fundamental discovery of the Hindu ethos. And that part of the Hindu ethos, which he felt was so important to save the West from its own ignorance, something that would stand up to all the challenges of science, which it has, because this was pre-quantum mechanics. I mean, quantum mechanics is there has to be an observer in order for there to be an event, and the observer affects the event. So anyway, I that's not my field. I shouldn't go there. The answers that people make, their understandings, the ways that they grapple with this question, why should we be good while in pursuit of the good life, is of profound significance to us as individuals and as a society. It is clear enough that without a critical mass of people being good as a matter of principle, things don't go well. They fall apart. We'll look first at the relationship between goodness and the good life in traditional Hinduism. Hinduism has four answers to the question, what do people want? The four aims of life: Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Artha and Kama, taken together, correspond roughly to the good life. Artha means literally thing, object, substance. It is usually translated as wealth, but has the larger connotation of achievement, worldly success, fame, health, beauty, and power. Kama means pleasure, but it is not limited to physical pleasure. It also includes intellectual and aesthetic pleasure. Dharma is one of those elusive Sanskrit terms that is both deeply meaningful and hard to translate. It corresponds roughly to goodness. So the relationship between Dharma on the one hand and Artha and Kama on the other is the relationship between goodness and the good life in Hinduism. Dharma is so comprehensive in its meaning that it deserves closer scrutiny. There are 4 orders of dharma: physical, social, moral, and spiritual. And I want to talk about that a little bit. And if you're interested, there's a discussion of this by Swami Bhajanananda, who's now one of our vice presidents, in one of the 1986 editorials in the Prabhupada Bharata. He was editor of the PB for quite a long time. Dharma means that which sustains a person or thing. That's a definition from the Mahabharata. Dharma means that which sustains a person or thing. That is to say, it is the inherent property of an object by virtue of which it exists. Water slakes thirst, whereas a stone does not. A pencil cannot be used as a walking stick any more than a pen can be used as an umbrella. Each object has its own dharma, its own properties and uses, which distinguishes it from other objects. This naturally implies the interrelationship of those objects with their specific qualities implies a cosmic order, and dharma was first identified with the common physical order that governs the whole universe. In this definition, all of the laws of science are only the manifestations of one universal truth, that dharma has its functioning on the physical level. The next stage of the evolution of the concept of dharma, it's identified with the social order. Each person has his or her own swadharma that determines one's function and place in society. The characteristics, the character that we come into this life with are derivative from our own previous volitional action in previous lives. It's cumulative. And based on what we come in with, we should be educated and trained to live in a way that suits our innate characteristics so that we can function properly and move toward the divine in a way that offers the least resistance. This is the concept of swadharma, and it's social because this swadharma interacts on the social level. It's in this sense that dharma is used in the ancient law books, the laws of Manu. Now, social order naturally implies the principle of justice, and justice cannot be enforced without assuming a universal moral order. We find dharma identify mostly with the moral order in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And this is the primary meaning of dharma. It's in terms of the moral order that dharma has its primary meaning. And this is vividly depicted in both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The primary message of the Mahabharata is, where there is dharma, there is victory. The story is this. On the eve of the great civil war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas, Duryodhana, the leader of the Kauravas, approached his mother Gandhari for her benediction. The blessings of one's mother are considered to be akin to the blessings of God. And this is true especially in virtuous mothers like Gandhari. Gandhari knew that her son was following adharma, unrighteousness. When Duryodhana asked for her blessings for victory in the horrendous battle which was to follow, Gandhari said, "Where there is dharma, there is victory." She knew that her son's unrighteousness would be his undoing. And in spite of her love for her son, she could not give his blessings for victory in the war because she could see that he could not win. Dharma is the moral order of the universe through which justice works. It's like a natural law operating in the domain of morality. Whether we're aware of the law of gravitation or not, it will have the same effect on us. We don't have to give it our approval. If a person jumps from a high place onto a hard object, there are consequences, with or without the belief in Newton's laws. Similarly, violation of the moral law has consequences, whether we believe it or not. Before our anger can reach its target, we ourselves are victimized. And before our benign intentions can have any external effect, we ourselves are benefited. We might be able to evade human law, but not Dharma, not the moral law. Sooner or later, the pain that we give others comes back to us. It may not be this life, but it comes. And when people have these near-death experiences and see their lives flash before them, it's a moral review. If you read the accounts, it's a moral review, and often it changes their outlook on life and their values after they come back from this experience. So these things are out there, they're part of human experience. You can't tamp them down with this materialistic outlook. They'll come up no matter what. According to Hinduism, the one universal duty of all human beings is the practice of Dharma. That is a very powerful statement. All people, past, present, and future, regardless of race, creed, education, social status, or any other characteristic, should follow Dharma. What does it mean? The most meaningful English rendering that I've heard is this: the one universal duty of all human beings is the practice of virtue. By virtue is meant the cultivation of fellow feeling for our fellow beings and overcoming negative feelings. Kindness, sincerity, charity, justice, truthfulness, admiration, humility, which represent our fellow feeling, are counted as virtues and constitute Dharma. And Dharma is really wonderful in this sense that there's no top or no bottom. No matter where you are, there's room for improvement. It's so frustrating sometimes. It's on a sliding scale. Okay, that's nice, but the only relief is in Ramakrishna's parable. The expert dancer never takes a step that's out of rhythm. He never takes a wrong step. Well, the dance is Dharma, and the expert dancer is the realized soul. And it's only when you've reached the source of Dharma through the realization, the highest realization, that you walk in Dharma naturally. For the rest of us, it's a challenge. So virtue, dharma, is the way that a deep abiding fellow feeling for others percolates through our psychophysical system. This deep abiding feeling for others has its origin at the most fundamental level, the spiritual order, which is the fourth meaning of dharma. It is at this level that Atman is realized as Brahman. It is at this level that Dharma came to refer to God realization in the 10th century onward, and Sanatana Dharma as an epithet of Hinduism. The path that leads consciously or unconsciously by ways crooked or straight to ultimate human fulfillment and the realization of divinity. It is at this level of Atman that all difference ceases. We're different physically, we're more different from one another mentally, but absolutely identical as Atman. That loving consciousness that abides behind all relative awareness and is the string that connects each discrete event in our lives and is the source of all joy. It's the oneness that Swami Vivekananda referred to in the earlier quote as the rationale of all ethics and spirituality. A equals A, Atman equals Atman. So there are four orders of Dharma: physical, social, moral, and spiritual. And the primary meaning is at the moral level. And there are four orders of life: artha, success and wealth; kama, legitimate pleasure. These are associated with the physical and social elements of Dharma. Moksha is associated with the spiritual aspect of Dharma. And it's the moral order of Dharma, goodness, the practice of virtue, that connects the good life, a life aimed at success and pleasure, to the path of liberation. The whole scheme of life that's offered in Hinduism doesn't end with the good life. Getting what life has to offer, realizing that success, achievement, fame, pleasure is not the end. This is where Dharma gets us. It gets us to the start of another journey. It gets us to the start of our spiritual lives when we consciously, knowing that nothing finite can satisfy us, start directing our lives to the infinite, to God, to that reality which is beyond us but sustains us. See, Harvard psychologist of long ago who knew Swami Akhilananda and who Swami Akhilananda would quote, Gordon Allport said, "Most people past the age of 40 live lives of quiet desperation." This materialistic outlook has no answer for the fundamental thorny existential problems of life. You know, sickness, misfortune, accidents, old age, and death. Got nothing there. You can't avoid it. Bing Crosby wouldn't go to funerals because he figured if he didn't go to funerals, he might not have to go to a funeral. He might not be the subject of a funeral. It didn't work. Bing Crosby. Just because they're famous doesn't mean they're wise. What does following Dharma, goodness, the practice of virtue, do for us as we pursue success and pleasure? The practice of virtue purifies and calms the mind, calms the senses, and brings clarity to the intellect. And what I mean by intellect here is buddhi. It's not the cogitating, determinative faculty of the mind. It's that higher, it's that aspect of the mind that gives you that Archimedean high, eureka, I found it. It's that decisive. It's not deliberation, it's determination. It's not cogitation, it's cognition. It's that kind of certainty that feels so good when we get it. And then the will can get behind it and we can move forward. So it clarifies the intellect. And it's through a clear, calm mind that the light of Atman is transmitted with less distortion. And it is through the clear, calm mind that the spontaneous joy of Atman finds expression. And we get spontaneous glimpses of the realm of the spirit. And that can start us again on our spiritual journey, these intimations of immortality that Wordsworth talked about. Now, when I was a teenager, my sister had a close friend whose mother was a Holocaust survivor. We didn't know it at the time. I didn't find it out till decades later when I read about her. And at some point, she started talking about her experiences in the Holocaust. And when she was a girl, she was separated in her family, and she was living in an orphanage. I don't remember whether it was France or Belgium, masquerading as a non-Jewish orphan. And as she was coming down the stairs of the orphanage, suddenly welling up within her, she felt this happiness, this kind of non-specific happiness. And she wondered, she said, everything's so terrible. How can this happen? And the insight came to her simultaneously that happiness did not depend on external circumstances. It came from inside. What an insight for a little girl. And maybe it was because of the difficulty of her circumstances that it came out so clearly. I don't know. But she just had that kind of sparkle, her entire life. So again, these are spiritual truths, but people are discovering them all the time. Hinduism has just kind of put it all together, and we have this tradition of saints and so forth, and developing this spiritual culture in so many dimensions. Okay, speaking of the practical benefits that come from the practice of Dharma, the clarity that comes to the intellect through the practice of Dharma is essential to right understanding. It's through that clear, calm mind that we can make decisions that are in our best interest. It's our internal guidance system. And it's through that guidance system that we can eventually get the best that this life has to offer and enjoy it as well as it can be enjoyed in this life. See, that guidance system is what makes the difference between who we were and who we are and who we will be. That's our most important asset. And practicing Dharma improves our guidance system. We might not be geniuses, but we'll do better with the practice of Dharma than without it. A seeker of wealth and pleasure in any form who does not deviate from the path of virtue, the path of Dharma, gets the greatest benefit out of every situation that comes to him or her. Let me repeat that. It's so important. A seeker of Dharma, a seeker of artha, wealth, and kama, pleasure, in any form, who does not deviate from the path of virtue, from the path of Dharma, who just gets the greatest benefit out of every situation that comes to him or her. Now, this seems diametrically opposed to the conventional American wisdom about the good life, in which getting wealth and pleasure is primary, and being honest and moral in their pursuit is a matter of expediency, certainly not the essential thing. Now, sometime during the pandemic, I think when things eased up a little bit, I went to our center in Raleigh, which in many ways is like this center. They hadn't had a guest Swami in a very long time. And the weekend before I went there, a group of 20 people went to the ashram and cleaned it from top to bottom, from side to side. You know, this was families. I mean, it's a young group, lots of kids. And they all got together and they spent the day and they ate together. And you could just feel walking in and seeing the place like I feel when I come in here, that people love it and care about it. And that Thakur is very happy to be in such a nice environment. Okay. And they've got a children's program, as you do. And after one of the presentations, I was talking with one of the mothers, and she said, you know, we've made a lot of sacrifices for our children. You know, we brought them here. They've gone through the educational program, and my son's a teenager now. And he came to my husband and I recently and said, let me get this here. He said, my goal in life is to make money. And I got to tell you, we were so disappointed that all the effort we've made, all the time we've spent with our kids, and all the association that they've had with the Ramakrishna Vivekananda movement. And he'd come to me with this at this age. And there's nothing, it seems, that my husband and I can do to cut into this. Now, this is a huge problem that we face as a culture. The tide of this materialistic outlet is so strong that it's difficult to countervail. It's a real challenge. Now, I've been speaking from the perspective of traditional Hinduism. Dharma is primary, and wealth and pleasure are secondary. They're derivative. Now, this is an argument that's based on authority of scripture and tradition. What evidence is there here and now in this American life that success and wealth and pleasure, the good life, take a back seat to honesty, to virtue, and to goodness? What if we could watch entire American lives as they unfold through time? What if we could study Americans from the time they were teenagers through old age to see what really makes them happy and healthy? This has been done in the Harvard study of adult development, which started in 1938 and has tracked the lives of 724 men as they unfolded. I'll quote from a talk given by a director of the study, Robert Waldinger, titled, it's a TED Talk given, I think, in 2015, What Makes a Good Life? Lessons from the Longest Study on Happiness. Are you with me so far? Okay. Now he's speaking of the study, this, at that time, 75-year-old study. In 1938, since 1938, we've tracked the lives of two groups of men. The first group started in the study when they were sophomores at Harvard College. They all finished college during World War II, and then most went off to serve in World War II. And the second group that we followed was a group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods. Boys who were chosen for the study specifically because they were from some of the most troubled, disadvantaged families in Boston of the 1930s. Most lived in tenements, many without hot and cold running water. When they entered the study, all of these teenagers were interviewed. They were given medical exams. We went to their homes. We interviewed their parents. And then these teenagers grew into adults who entered all walks of life. They became factory workers, lawyers, bricklayers, doctors, one president of the United States. Some developed alcoholism. A few became schizophrenics. Some climbed the social ladder from the bottom all the way to the very top. And some took that journey in the opposite direction. To get the clearest picture of these lives, we don't just send them questionnaires. We interview them in their living rooms. We get their medical records from their doctors. We draw their blood. We scan their brains. We talk to their children. We videotape them talking with their wives about their deepest concerns. And when about a decade ago, we finally asked the wives if they would like to join us as members of the research study, most of the women said, you know, it's about time. Now, you've got to remember, in 1938, Harvard was still a men's college, so they had a legitimate reason for just having the men at that time. So, what have we learned? What are the lessons from the tens of thousands of pages of information that we've generated on these lives all these years? Now, I should mention at the beginning of the talk, he quotes a survey of millennials, and this is what were their goals in life. And 80% of the respondents said to become rich, and another 50% said one of the more important things was to become famous. What have we learned? Well, the lessons aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder in order to get them. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year-old study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. Now, this is my editorial insertion. Well, what are good relationships founded on? Self-sacrifice, love, the practice of virtue. If you stay in a committed relationship, you're going to there's going to be friction, and there's going to be change, and there's going to be spiritual development. You get two egos that close together, in order to stay together, they have to kind of rub off the rough edges on each other, and raising the kids and all that. It happens naturally, but it's important. It happens in a closed system. You can't run away from it. So good, close relationships necessarily imply the practice of Dharma. That's my editorial insertion. We've learned, and I'll go back to him. We've learned three big lessons about relationships. The first is that social connections are really good for us, and that loneliness kills. It turns out that people who are more socially connected to family, friends, to community are happier, they're physically healthier, and they live longer than people who are less well connected. And the experience of loneliness turns out to be toxic. People who are more isolated than they want to be from others find that they are less happy, Their health declines earlier in midlife, their brain functioning declines sooner, and they live shorter lives than those who are not lonely. And the sad fact is that at any given time, more than 1 in 5 Americans will report feeling lonely. And the second big lesson that we learn is that it's not just the number of friends that you have. And it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship, but it is the quality of your close relationships that matters. It turns out that living in the midst of conflict is really bad for our health. And living in the midst of good, warm relationships is protective of health and happiness. Once we had followed our men all the way into their 80s, we wanted to look back at them at midlife to see if we could predict who was going to grow into a happy, healthy octogenarian and who was not. And at age 50, it wasn't their middle-aged cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their close relationships. Those who were most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. A good close relationship seemed to buffer us from some of the slings and arrows of getting old. Our most happily partnered men and women reported in their 80s that on those days when they had more physical pain, their mood stayed just as happy. But those who were in unhappy relationships, on the days they reported more physical pain, it was magnified by emotional pain. And the third big lesson that we learned about relationships and our health is that good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains. It turns out that being in a securely attached relationship to another person in your 80s is protective. That people who are in relationships where they feel, and this is really important, where they feel they can count on the other person in times of need. This is Dharma. Those people's memories stay sharper longer. And the people in relationships where they feel they can't count on the other one, those are the people that experience an earlier mental memory decline. And he adds a caveat. He says, and those good relationships, because they videotape people talking, those good relationships don't have to be smooth all the time. Some of our octogenarian couples could bicker with each other day in and day out. But as long as they felt that they could really count on the other when the going got tough, those arguments did not take a toll on their memories. Many of our men, when they were starting out as young adults, really believed that fame and wealth and high achievement were what they needed to go after to have a good life. But over and over, these 75 years, our study has shown that the people who fared best were the people who leaned into those relationships with family, friends, and community. This is Dharma. This is what holds us as human beings and is the foundation of both our secular and spiritual well-being. So to sum up, a seeker of wealth and pleasure who doesn't deviate from the path of Dharma, from the path of virtue, gets the greatest benefit out of every situation that comes to him or her. From one's experience of the blessings of life, wealth, power, position, beauty, knowledge, happiness, honor, one develops through experience the insight by which one becomes convinced of the inherent inadequacy of even the greatest success. We're infinite dreamers, dreaming finite dreams, as Swamiji says, and the finite will not satisfy our innate longing for the infinite. The human life, the human mind seeks life without death, prosperity without adversity, youth without old age, construction without decay. Through the practice of Dharma, one realizes that these polarities go together, and seeking one without the other is a wild goose chase for the unmixed blessings of life. You can't get to the highest goal by manipulating Maya. Have to get beyond it. It is then that one tries to approach the divine ground with unfaltering steps. It is then that one says, in this world, in search of wealth, I have found thee the greatest treasure. In this world, in search of someone to love, I have found thee the most adorable one. Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, those persons of virtuous deeds whose vices have been eliminated become free from the delusion of duality and worship God with firm resolve. This marks the transition between the good life, the pursuit of prosperity through artha and kama, to the path of supreme beatitude, the pursuit of liberation, moksha. Those awakened to the call of the eternal and the eternal alone are few. So this is the perspective of Hinduism. The pursuit of artha and kama, the good life in contemporary terms, must be based on Dharma for our individual and collective well-being. And Dharma is based on the highest truth, that reality is not material or energetic, but spiritual and non-dual. Dharma is the means, the manner in which this highest truth, which is open to discovery by anyone, manifests in our interpersonal, that means interpersonal, social, intrapersonal, psychological, and social levels. Oh. Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This ever-changing, interdependent universe of things and beings is infinite. That self-existent, unchanging, spiritual reality is infinite. This ever-changing universe, having come from that unchanging reality, that reality remains undivided, unchanging, perfect, complete, infinite. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So, oh, an hour. No time for questions and answers, sorry. You're a psychiatrist? Yes, that's Hari. No, no. Okay, okay. You're not first. You're second. He really has a question. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
How did you come here? Oh, sorry. I'm on call, so this thing went to phone to call. Sorry about that. The question is, how does the swabhava, the innate nature and dharma go together? Some people may fit into things a lot more easier than the others. How does that, is there any dynamic interaction?
You know, this is these are really fundamental questions. And this is where it's so important to have people in the society who can read character like a good Ayurvedic physician can read a pulse. It's important to have people who can spot the innate characteristics that we're born with and advise on how to train this person. Something that just comes to mind as I'm speaking is Nehru's wife was an initiated disciple of Swami Shivananda. And so she was a devotee, and she brought Indira along with her to a gathering in which Swami Vijnanananda was present. And as you can imagine, Indira was an irrepressible bundle of energy as a little girl, and making a racket and stomping around and screaming and doing things that joyous little girls do, you know, spontaneously. And her mother felt that she should restrain her, and so she wouldn't be causing this commotion. And Swami Vijnananda says, no. He says, don't rein her in. You don't, she'll express that energy. She'll do great things in her life. And that kind of spontaneous understanding that comes with being either realized soul or far advanced in spiritual life, where you can, without these personality tests and all this, you can read character and advise on these issues. So it's a fundamental benefit of being in a spiritually oriented culture over time. The way I heard it from my teacher, Swami Satprakashananda, the caste system was not originally locked in, and it wasn't originally hereditary. It was one, you know, depending on whether what kind of attitude a child had for life, they should be trained appropriately. And this needed to be recognized so that you could early on, so that people could be directed properly. And it became rigidified when the culture became under attack so strongly in the Mughal period. Yeah, but before that, there was a fluidity, and people could move around a little bit.
So you use the word beatitude. Could you expound on that and perhaps use a Hindi or Sanskrit
What
word?
word?
for-
Beatitude.
Yeah, how would you, how do you, how do we strive?
Well, what is it? Beatitude is one way of expressing. Final beatitude is God realization. It's can't be encompassed in words, really. So much so much joy in consciousness that it's just beyond, so far beyond ordinary experience. You can kind of give an inkling of it, but it has to be experienced. And that's the whole, thrust of life. How do we approach it? I mean, we we make choices all day long that are either taking us there or taking us somewhere else. Usually the choices are mixed. It's not a clear cut. We kind of muddle along the best we can. But as long as we keep the goal in mind, as long as we keep holy company, either through our books, through our spiritual practice, through the company of other devotees that are struggling and striving along these same lines, and we keep trying, we progress. It's a matter of direction and persistence. I've forgotten your name.
Shaila.
Shaila. Yeah, that's it. I know you're together.
Very good.
Yeah.
We've been, of course, part of the mission and, trying to hear the lectures and, but everybody has gone through these 3 years of pandemic and what we are seeing all over the world, a lot of people have, again, we as physicians, we all.
You know what's going on because they come to you.
Yeah, they come to us.
Yeah.
And we are, again, we also have lectures and, trying to minimize the burnout because everybody is like.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we put the perspective and learn from what's going on and how do we explain to ourselves and for the people we come in path? Because we have seen a lot of death, we are still seeing a lot of suffering. And of course, we are continually treating chronic illnesses and all that. But we're also seeing the war, the suffering, the people dying, and it's all affecting everybody, of course. And then how do we incorporate what we are learning from you?
Mm. So as physicians, you've got a direct service profession. It's not like scientific research where if you find something, it'll trickle down eventually, but you don't know how to humanity at large. You've got someone with some kind of affliction that's coming to you for help. It's person to person. And how do you deal with the the suffering that you're finding. Well, we've got two intensivists, devotees that I know pretty well for quite a long time. And I talk to them occasionally to see how they were doing. And because they deal with death all the time in intensive care, but never on the scale that they saw during the pandemic. And Cordelia Sharma used to be in St. Louis, but she's been in New York for some years. And she made a conscious choice to work in a hospital that serves a very poor, underprivileged area. So she really saw the worst of the worst. And I'm not sure that she was able to articulate how she got through it, but she did, and she's still working in that hospital. There was a time when it was starting to get to her, but it's like if you have your spiritual practice, the gift is that every day through that spiritual practice, there is some time during that practice when you forget yourself, when you forget yourself. That means, and normally, in order to forget ourselves, we have to go to sleep and get into deep sleep, because our ego follows us into the dream state and still bothers us. But it's in deep sleep that we finally throw off the yoke of the ego and get rest. And the Vedantic teaching is that we rest in Atman, though unconsciously, and we need that every day to maintain ourselves as human beings. But when we begin to get that nodal point through our spiritual practice, when we're in the conscious state, then we begin to get the benefits of the strength and joy and awareness of that infinite dimension, which is ours, which is who we are, consciously. See, that changes us. And it's through that contact, I think, that we gain the resources to face those difficult situations. So it can be done either by praying to Holy Mother and tell her what a hard thing it is and asking for help, or it can be done through that kind of direct way. Prayer works in that we're articulating just with total sincerity whatever it is that's going on, and with such intensity and such perseverance that at some point we break through that worry and we get out on the other side and we feel that grace come in. If it's articulated and presented with enough intensity, it somehow gets us to the next level. You see, the interventions to these knotty problems of life, that they're the ones that really move us along, don't come at the level that the problems present themselves. The problem, and the problems aren't necessarily solved, but they're resolved at that higher level. I mean, the whole solution from my experience is in reaching out for the infinite, either through our relationship with our chosen ideal or directly by meditation on the divine consciousness. And that, it's a reset, because these things are problems, but when we just keep dwelling on them and magnifying them, then they become enormous problems. But if we can have a reset every day or twice a day, it's like starting over. You see, it's like, what was the name of that fellow that got a crowbar, a railroad spike driven into his head, Phineas Gage? And it might not have been him, but when the cognitive aspect of the mind is cut off surgically from the emotional aspect of the mind, in some cases, they used to do this with intractable pain, and they'd ask the person who got surgery afterwards, do you still feel the pain? Oh, he said, oh, yes. He says, the little pain is there, but the big pain is gone.
Like what was first and second round.
Well, no, it's what we add to it. It's the limbic system contributing. Woe is me. I'm suffering so much. You know, the little pain is there, but the big pain is gone. So through our spiritual practice, we can reset ourselves in the immensity of the infinite, and not magnify these problems. You know, as problems, you know, they're problems, and either we can work on them or we can't, or whatever. But it's what the energy that we add to it that makes them more real and more difficult. So if we can cut that off and just deal with the little pain that's there, it really changes things. No.
One is a short question. When you said in the surveys, the results of that 73-year survey, you said there were 3 takeaways. The first one was connections are important. And the third one was that good relationships help both bodies and brains. What was the second one?
Okay. The first is that social connections are really good for us and that loneliness kills. The second is it's not just the number of friends or whether you're in a committed relationship. In other words, but it's the quality of your close relationships that matters. And it has to be such so that in those close relationships, you know that the other person or the other people will be there when times get tough. That you know, there's and vice versa, so that it's not a relationship of convenience. It's something beyond that. And the third, okay. Oh, and the third big lesson is that good relationship don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains.
And the other major question, which is I think overlap with Hari's question, the beginning.
Yeah.
You define Dharma evolution or unfolding of where you started in the appropriate direction. So, for example, so I took it like this, that if my starting point is in the family of, say, mafia. So my from childhood, I'm seeing what is supposed to be dharma, which is to go, kill, loot, do things with this. So will dharma will still be interpreted as that his dharma at that point should be to be the best mafia he should be?
Oh, what a nice question. There's a common saying, there is honor among thieves.
Yes.
It's not a total immorality. They want the best for their family. They want their kids to get educated. They want and maybe this is the best they can do at making the kind of living that they need to do the best they can for their families. So, yeah. So, and some of the things that are so dharma and adharma are usually mixed up. You know, it's not clean. It's not one thing is just totally dharmic and with no elements of adharma. It's selfishness and unselfishness are kind of intertwined. So, you know, and you may disagree with me, and this is not a teaching of Hinduism, this is my own viewpoint. There's a lot of similarity between the bottom and the top of the social pyramid. The people at the bottom are doing nasty things, and often the people at the top are doing nasty things.
Yes.
Yeah. And and we tend to think that because people have succeeded in the good life and they have a lot of money, they're good people. And that's not necessarily true. I have a cousin who has I don't know what you call it. It's such a strange thing. Her company, she's in England, and she has a company that does background investigations when big companies merge to find out what the people are like and what might be going on that's not known, commonly known. And it's often true that, you know, there's a lot of adharma at the top. And when it's at the top, the subsidiary effects can sometimes be much more harmful than when it's just one guy doing one crime on another person. It can have societal repercussions. So, and I'm reminded, listening to Swami Satprakashananda lecture in St. Louis, he was so proper, you know, he was so proper in every way, the way he groomed himself, the way he dressed. I mean, everything was clean and neat and orderly and buttoned. And his speech was like he was writing a book, you know. From the podium, these sentences would come out from him like, you know, it was this kind of very sophisticated level of English expression. And he was talking about some of the people in the history of religions that, like Valmiki and Angulimala, and there are people in the Western traditions, like Saint Francis, was not a very exemplary saintly character as a young man. And speaking about this a little bit, and then he paused and kind of interrupted himself and said, "The great ones saved many rotten people." You see, but again, they have this kind of, or Girish Ghosh wasn't particularly a socially acceptable person. But there was greatness in him that Sri Ramakrishna saw and brought out. So, or Amjad, the robber in the Jaranbati locality. Everyone has that divine spark. Everyone has that. Everyone's going to realize God. And sometimes the energy with which the bad guys pursue their vocation takes them to that transition point faster than people who live kind of lukewarm lives, wishy-washy lives. There's the energy that makes someone a notorious bad guy. If it flips and they start in the other direction, that can take them to God. Remember, as I do, the great ones saved many rotten people.
So you are saying St. Francis was an example, as Girish Ghosh is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being saved, a rotten person being saved.
Yeah, yeah.
Maharaj, in that last thing what you said, I just want to add, in one place, Swamiji in India was telling some people that you guys are so messed up. I mean, that was my English. You guys are so messed up that you cannot even steal.
Yeah.
I would say a thief has much more hope of getting moksha than you.
Yeah. Swamiji had an innate ability to shake things up. We forget that. He's the great Vivekananda, but the strength he had to come in and tell the Americans in Detroit, as a nation, you're not Christians, go back to Christ. And then to come back to India and tell them what they needed to hear.
Yes.
And Shankara had that same strength. It's divine. It's divinity in action. Yeah.
Swamiji, I have a question about, the Dharma and resistance, which is, if one has a particular, I'm going to use the word role in life to play based on their sadharma and their position in life, whatever it is, situation in life. How does one not get stuck in some bad situation and say, well, this is what I'm supposed to be doing and where I'm supposed to be at? And how does one get, at what point is it to say, okay, enough, and I need to make a change versus I need to persevere and put up with?
Well, that's idiosyncratic. It's hard to answer generally across the board. And I think that's where having a close personal relationship helps a great deal. Sometimes when you're in that kind of quandary, all you really need to do is talk to someone that's close to you, and that will help kind of clarify things. I think that's we need to have people that we trust, that we can confide in without fear of repercussion, who we can be totally honest with. And that saves us from this toxic situation of that they're talking about in this research study of loneliness. To have people that you feel utterly safe with. And then you have this, without paying for professional help, your friends or relatives actually do that job. And you do it for them. That's the way it works. And then time helps us sort those things out as well.
Swami Swahananda, when he established this, he said that during his inauguration speech, but also he did the same thing for the Rally Ashram where he went. He said that centers like this has a big role in when you gather, when you see others like you realize that there are others who are also going through the struggle of life, and still they're trying to get to the goal of peace and realization. So this will help each other. So these places are important. So that I have realized later on, that like you said, that yes, ideally I should have 10 with very good relations. While I'm trying to do that, even these gathering places, these holy places where people are unselfishly going to help, not necessarily fully trustworthy or whatever.
But yes, it all counts. It all counts. It all counts.
And therefore, not I, but at least Sushmita gets to hear and help many people who come up with their life difficulty, because she keeps it all confidential.
Yeah.
And also she uses her wisdom and her, what I will call purity.
Well, we all have that. And
We don't have what?
we all do have that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know that Abraham Lincoln said he was a gifted speaker. When I do good, I feel good. You know, there's this, when we're actually serving, we forget ourselves, and there's something that's just pushing us up at the same time. When we actually act unselfishly, there's an inner affirmation it's quite different from our normal mode. And you know, karma yoga is not the action, it's this inner transformation that occurs. And having a place where we can do the simplest things, you know, like cleaning up after meals or sweeping the floor or whatever. And we know we're not doing it. We're not doing it for ourselves. You know, there's a joy that comes from that. In Vivekananda Vidyapit, they don't have a staff. is the professional people who are sending their kids there. You know, the doctors and engineers sweep the floor and keep the classes. And the kids understand where their parents' values are. And, you know, it's all an attempt to teach these values that we've been talking about, that we talk about at all our meetings, in such a way that the kids imbibe them, assimilate them, and live them. Because that's what makes things work. It has to be passed on. Yeah.
But when you were making the connection between Atman and goodness,
Yeah.
I was reminded of one of my bosses in my work.
Mhm.
There's a third person who did his PhD from Columbia University, and he made me aware of something called the golden rule,
Mm.
which I wasn't quite aware of in those words. But do you feel like there is a connection between that concept, which may not be truly a Hindu concept, and not the concept of Atman, and what you were trying to say today about goodness?
Yeah.
The reason
Yeah,
behind goodness
yeah.
being-
What is the golden rule anyway?
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's Dharma. But what Swami Vivekananda is saying is that that people are no longer satisfied with following that just because the holy book says that. They want a rational explanation. And the rational explanation for unselfishness lies in Atman. We all have, I mean, we're the Atman is the same in each of us. That loving consciousness is what connects us. It makes us one. And from that level, unselfish, when one has that level of realization, unselfishness comes naturally. So this is his point, is that Advaita underpins all the dualistic teachings. And it's important now to bring it out and spread it broadcast. Not that we'll be non-dualists and practice jnana yoga, but it underpins and supports dualism. It underpins and supports Dharma. It underpins and supports the golden rule. And if you've got people who don't accept authority, then they need this. It can't be reserved for the select few as it was for so many centuries and centuries. It has to be broadcast to the world because it's the medicine that the world needs right now. Hmm. And it's, I mean, these fundamental truths are there to be discovered. You can see in this longitudinal study of adult development that started at Harvard that it's there to be rediscovered at any time. And interesting, one thing that Swami Satprakashananda said, maybe in the 60s, he was asked by someone if the teachings of Vedanta would be accepted in the West. And he said, yes, they will be. but the source won't be recognized. See, we'll have to rediscover them in our own way. And this is one of the things that's going on, but there will be other ways. And when these things are discovered intrinsically by a culture, then the culture owns it, and it can gain traction and move forward. And you can see some of these borrowings actually from Swamiji in particular. If you pay close attention, it's hard to trace it out, you know, this, because it's so general. But I heard one of the sisters that's active in interfaith group in St. Louis, quoting Swamiji. She said, she was, let's see, what's the exact quote? She quoted it exactly. The individual is a circle whose center is located in a particular place and whose circumference is nowhere, infinite. And God is a circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. It's infinite. She quoted him exactly. And I asked her where she got that. She said, well, I just picked it up in my reading. And she's a theologian. She's retired now, but she was teaching at one of our theological institutes, Catholic theological institutes in St. Louis. So it's percolating. It's percolating.
Yeah, that was exactly that.
So anyway, this is it's good to think about these things. I always learn a lot when I break my head on these fundamental concepts. It gives me a clearer understanding, even if I can't communicate it very well. Any questions? No? Anand? Hari? Anyway.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're welcome.